Have you ever asked yourself this question? Quietly, honestly, without drama or excuses. Why does life seem to reward the cold, the calculating, the emotionally distant, while breaking the kind, the patient, the ones who keep trying to do the right thing? And what if I told you, this video is not here to comfort you. It is here to explain why the world keeps hurting you and how to stop being its favorite target. This is Psychology Unlocked. I am Dr. Adam. Listen slowly, because this may be uncomfortable, but it may also be the moment something finally clicks. The world does not break people randomly. That idea is comforting but false. The world breaks patterns, predictable minds, open hearts without boundaries, people who confuse goodness with safety. From a psychological perspective, systems do not attack what they cannot exploit. And you, if you are watching this, are likely not weak. You are readable. Machiavelli understood something centuries ago that modern psychology now confirms with data, with behavioral studies, with cold statistics. The world is not organized around fairness, it is organized around incentives. And the most dangerous incentive you can offer is unlimited tolerance. Let me say that again slowly. Unlimited tolerance does not make you moral, it makes you usable. In clinical psychology, we see this pattern repeatedly. Patients who are exhausted, emotionally drained, quietly angry at life. They are rarely cruel people. They are overexposed people. They listened too long. They forgave too quickly. They explained themselves too much. They stayed when every signal told them to leave. And society praises this, calls it empathy, calls it emotional intelligence, calls it being a good person. But Machiavelli would call it something else, a strategic error. Not because kindness is wrong, but because kindness without ruthlessness has no defensive structure. The world is not actively evil most of the time, it is indifferent, and indifference will grind you down faster than hatred ever could. Here is the uncomfortable psychological truth. Most harm does not come from villains. It comes from people who benefit from your silence, your patience, your hesitation to be firm. And once you understand this, you cannot unsee it. Notice how often you are the one adapting, the one understanding, the one making excuses for behavior that hurts you. That is not coincidence. That is conditioning. From early life, many adults were trained, subtly, to associate conflict with danger, to associate firmness with rejection, to associate self-protection with guilt. So they grow into adults who smile while being disrespected, who negotiate their own boundaries away, who feel anxious saying no, but feel strangely responsible for everyone else's comfort. Psychology calls this conflict avoidance. Machiavelli would call it political suicide, because the world does not negotiate with people who cannot withdraw their cooperation. Think about this carefully. Every system you are part of, work, relationships, family, society, is a power exchange. Not always aggressive, often invisible, but always present. And the moment you remove your capacity to be dangerous, not violent, not cruel, but dangerous in the sense that you can leave, refuse, disengage, withhold access, you become safe to exploit. This is where many people misunderstand ruthlessness. They imagine rage, harshness, dominance. That is not what Machiavelli meant, and that is not what psychology supports. Ruthlessness is emotional clarity without apology. It is the ability to see people as they are, not as you wish they would be. It is the discipline to stop negotiating with patterns that never change. The world breaks you when you insist on being understood by people who profit from misunderstanding you. And here is where it gets personal. If you are constantly explaining your intentions, constantly clarifying that you meant well, constantly hoping that if you just say it better, softer, kinder, they will finally treat you differently. You are not in a communication problem. You are in a power problem. Healthy systems respond to feedback. Unhealthy systems respond only to consequences. This is not pessimism. This is behavioral psychology. Reinforced behavior repeats. Unpunished behavior escalates. And when your tolerance absorbs the cost of other people's actions, you teach them exactly how to treat you. Machiavelli warned rulers not to rely on love alone, not because love is useless, but because love without fear has no anchor. Translate that into modern psychological language, and it becomes this. Affection without boundaries dissolves into entitlement. You do not need to become cruel, but you must become unreadable. You must learn when to withdraw warmth, when to stop explaining, when silence communicates more than words ever could. Because the world listens to behavior, not intentions. And right now, if the world keeps breaking you, it is listening very carefully to what you are showing it. Pause for a moment. Breathe. This is not an accusation. It is an awakening. Because once you see the pattern, you can interrupt it. And that interruption begins with a simple, uncomfortable shift. You stop trying to be good and start trying to be solid. Not liked, not approved, not understood by everyone. Solid. And that, psychologically speaking, is where real safety begins. Most people never realize the exact moment they start losing power over their own life. It does not arrive loudly. There is no dramatic collapse, no clear betrayal that forces awareness. It happens quietly. When you hesitate to say what you really think, when you feel tension in your chest before setting a boundary, when you already know the outcome of a situation, yet you stay, hoping this time will be different. From a psychology standpoint, this is not weakness, it is conditioning. You were trained over years to believe that being agreeable keeps you safe, that being flexible keeps you loved, that being patient eventually earns respect. But Machiavelli and modern behavioral psychology alike would disagree, because respect is not granted to those who endure. It is granted to those who can withdraw. Niccolò Machiavelli never wrote for idealists. He wrote for observers, for those willing to see humans not as they should be, but as they are. And what humans respond to, consistently, is leverage. Leverage does not mean threats. It does not mean intimidation. It means choice. The choice to walk away. The choice to say no without explanation. The choice to remove access to your time, your energy, your emotional labor. Here is the psychological paradox most adults struggle with. The more you try to prove your value, the less valuable you become in the eyes of systems that profit from you. Why? Because value that must be proven is already assumed to be negotiable. Think about your own life. The relationships that drain you, the environments where your effort is invisible, the conversations where you are always the one adjusting your tone, your needs, your expectations. Those systems are not broken, they are optimized. Optimized to extract from you without resistance. In psychology, this is called learned compliance. In Machiavellian terms, it is voluntary submission disguised as virtue. And the world rewards this behavior until it consumes you. You begin to feel tired for no clear reason, irritable in silence, disconnected from your own desires, not because you are depressed, but because your nervous system is in constant negotiation mode, always scanning, always adapting, always anticipating the emotional reactions of others. This creates chronic stress, and chronic stress slowly erodes identity. You stop asking what you want. You start asking what will cause the least friction. That is not peace. That is survival. The world does not break people suddenly. It breaks them through repetition, small compromises, ignored discomfort, delayed boundaries, until one day you look around and realize your life feels narrow, constrained, predictable in the worst way. And here is where ruthlessness enters, not as cruelty, but as psychological hygiene. Ruthlessness is the refusal to negotiate your core needs. It is deciding that your emotional energy is not a public resource. It is understanding that empathy without selectivity becomes self-harm. Machiavelli warned that those who try to be good in a world that is not will be destroyed by those who are not bound by such rules. Modern psychology would phrase it differently. People without boundaries are magnets for people without conscience. This does not mean everyone is malicious, but many are opportunistic, and opportunism does not require hatred, only access. Access to your time, access to your forgiveness, access to your emotional availability. Once that access is unlimited, You are no longer respected. You are managed. Notice how quickly dynamics shift when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop justifying your decisions, when you do not rush to soften your firmness with smiles and reassurance. People become confused, uncomfortable, sometimes even hostile. Not because you became worse, but because the rules changed. And systems resist rule changes. Psychologically, this is expected. Any organism reacts negatively to the removal of a benefit it has grown accustomed to. Your guilt in these moments is not moral, it is neurological. Your brain was trained to associate firmness with danger. But danger to whom? To the system that depended on your compliance. Machiavelli understood that appearing kind while being strategically firm was not hypocrisy. It was survival. And survival for an adult mind is not about endurance anymore. It is about selectivity. You do not need to confront everyone. You do not need to dominate conversations. You do not need to prove strength. You need to become less accessible to disrespect, less available to manipulation, less predictable in your tolerance, because the world adjusts its behavior only when its assumptions about you are violated. And when you finally violate the assumption that you will always stay, always forgive, always understand, something shifts. Not externally at first, but internally. Your nervous system relaxes. Your thoughts become clearer. Your presence becomes heavier, slower, more grounded. Not because you became harder, but because you became real. And that reality is where the world begins to treat you differently, even when it doesn't like it. There is a moment, subtle but irreversible, when a person realizes the world is not going to change its behavior just because you finally understand it. That moment feels strange, quiet, almost disappointing, because for a long time, understanding felt like progress. You studied psychology. You learned about trauma, attachment styles, childhood wounds. You told yourself, if I can just understand why they behave this way, I can respond better, softer, smarter. And yes, understanding can bring compassion. But compassion without limits slowly turns into self-erasure. This is where many intelligent, emotionally aware adults get trapped. They become fluent in explanation, but illiterate in enforcement. They can describe patterns perfectly. They just cannot stop participating in them. From a psychological lens, this happens because insight alone does not rewire behavior. Consequences do. Your nervous system does not change because you see the truth. It changes when your actions finally match it. And that is where ruthlessness becomes unavoidable. Not the dramatic kind, not the angry kind, the quiet kind. The kind where you stop responding immediately. Where you let silence do the work you used to do with paragraphs. Where you no longer rush to close emotional gaps that were never yours to close. This feels wrong at first, cold, unnatural, because you were trained to equate availability with virtue. But psychologically, constant availability signals low self-valuation. Think about how the brain assigns importance. Scarcity increases focus. Consistency without cost reduces attention. When you are always there, always reachable, always understanding, your presence becomes background noise. Not because you lack value, but because value that never withdraws loses contrast. Machiavellian thought aligns here with modern psychology in an uncomfortable way. People do not test boundaries they believe will hold. They test boundaries they suspect will bend. And every time you bend, you confirm their suspicion. This is not about blame, it is about awareness. You were likely rewarded early in life for being easy to manage, praised for being mature, patient, selfless. So your identity fused with accommodation. But identities built on accommodation collapse under pressure, because the world applies pressure relentlessly. Workplaces do not stop demanding because you are tired. Relationships do not automatically become fair because you are loyal. Systems do not slow down because you are overwhelmed. They slow down when friction appears. Ruthlessness, psychologically, is the introduction of friction. It is the moment you allow others to feel the discomfort you have been carrying alone. You stop absorbing the emotional cost of their behavior. You let pauses linger. You let disappointment exist without rushing to fix it. You let people wonder where they stand instead of reassuring them constantly. This is not manipulation, it is balance. Healthy adults can tolerate uncertainty. Unhealthy dynamics collapse when certainty is removed. So when people react strongly to your calm withdrawal, when they accuse you of changing, becoming distant, becoming selfish, listen carefully. They are not reacting to who you became. They are reacting to what they lost access to. Your energy, your attention, your emotional labor. Psychology calls this extinction burst. When a behavior no longer produces the same reward, it intensifies before it fades. Expect pushback. Expect confusion. Expect guilt. Not because you are doing something wrong, but because the system is recalibrating. This is where many people retreat. They feel the discomfort and rush back into old roles. They say, maybe I am being too harsh. Maybe I should explain again. Maybe I should soften this. And the cycle restarts. Ruthlessness is staying steady through that discomfort. It is not reacting emotionally to emotional reactions. It is holding your position without aggression, without apology, just holding. And something remarkable happens when you do. Your internal dialogue changes. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head. You stop anticipating how to manage others' feelings. You start sleeping better, breathing deeper, because your nervous system finally receives a new message. I do not need to be liked to be safe. That message rewires everything. Your posture changes. Your voice slows. Your presence becomes heavier. Not intimidating, grounded. And grounded people do not need to demand respect. They radiate consequence. The world feels this, not consciously, but instinctively, because humans at a primitive level assess risk constantly. And when you stop being endlessly accommodating, when your boundaries stop being theoretical, you register differently in the minds of others. Not as someone to dominate, but as someone to consider. This is the quiet power Machiavelli pointed to, and the psychological strength most people never develop, because it requires tolerating the discomfort of being misunderstood. And that is where most people give up. But if you stay, if you allow that misunderstanding to exist, you step into a different relationship with the world, one where it no longer breaks you casually. There comes a point where you stop asking how to protect yourself and start asking a more dangerous question. Who would I be if I no longer tried to be harmless? Most people never ask this, because the answer threatens the version of themselves they built to survive. They confuse harmlessness with goodness. They confuse restraint with morality. They confuse silence with maturity. But psychology tells us something very different. A harmless adult is not a safe adult. A harmless adult is a vulnerable one. Safety comes from the capacity to respond, to withdraw, to disrupt, not from the promise that you never will. This is the final lesson most people resist. The world does not need you to become cruel. It needs you to become capable of cruelty and choose restraint consciously. There is a massive psychological difference between these two states. One is fear-based, the other is power-based. When you are harmless, you avoid conflict because you cannot tolerate it. When you are ruthless, you avoid conflict because you do not need it. That difference changes everything. Your tone, your timing, your decisions. You stop reacting to disrespect immediately. You observe it. You stop chasing closure. You allow distance. You stop trying to correct how people see you. You let their misunderstandings sit with them. This feels unnatural at first, almost like you are betraying something sacred inside yourself. But what you are actually betraying is an outdated survival strategy, one that worked when you were younger, smaller, dependent, but now keeps you stuck. Psychologically, adulthood requires the integration of aggression, not violence, not hostility. Aggression as energy, as assertion, as when aggression is repressed, it leaks out as anxiety, resentment, exhaustion. When it is integrated, it becomes calm authority. This is why ruthless people often appear relaxed. They are not constantly scanning for approval. They are not negotiating their existence. They know they can walk away. And because they know this, they rarely need to. The world senses this, not through words, through pacing, through eye contact, through silence. You stop filling space unnecessarily. You stop over-explaining. You stop rushing to respond. And suddenly, conversations slow down around you. People choose their words more carefully. They test less. Not because you demanded respect, but because you are no longer inexpensive to disrespect. This is the final psychological shift. You move from being emotionally cheap to emotionally costly. Not expensive in drama, expensive in access. And yes, some people will leave. Some relationships will dissolve quietly. Some connections will never return to what they were. That is not loss. That is filtration. The world breaks people who refuse to filter, who let everything in, who carry what was never theirs to carry. Ruthlessness is not about hardening your heart. It is about narrowing it, choosing who has access, choosing who matters, choosing where your energy goes. And once you do this, something unexpected happens. The world does not stop being harsh. It does not become fair, but it stops seeing you as easy. Problems approach you differently. People negotiate instead of assume. Pressure meets resistance instead of absorption. You are no longer the soft surface life crashes into. You are solid, and solid things do not need to shout. They endure. They shape what hits them. This is not a motivational message. It is a psychological reality. The world will break you unless you become ruthless enough to stop letting it. Not ruthless toward others, ruthless toward patterns that destroy you, ruthless toward guilt that no longer serves you, ruthless toward versions of yourself that survived but never lived. This is Psychology Unlocked. I am Dr. Adam, and if this reached you, then somewhere inside, you already know. It is time